In a bold social experiment, BTS's Jimin decided to disguise himself as a homeless man to see how a prestigious bank in Seoul would treat someone who appeared to be down on their luck. But before we get into the shocking twist of this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments which country you are watching from. Army, we love reading your stories. The afternoon sun shone over the bustling streets of Seoul, illuminating a city where luxury and wealth were on full display. Sleek cars and security vans passed by, but walking among them was a man in worn-out clothes drawing curious looks from strangers. His sneakers were scuffed, his jeans faded and torn, and his t-shirt hung loosely on his slender frame. Yet despite his shabby appearance, he moved with a quiet confidence, as if nothing in the world could shake him. That man was Jimin of BTS, hidden behind a carefully planned disguise. He traded his signature style for a messy wig, an old baseball cap, and clothes that looked as if they'd survived a decade of hard living. His greatest challenge was suppressing the magnetic presence that usually captivated everyone around him. For the world in that moment, he was invisible. Ahead of him stood the imposing facade of First Trust Bank, one of Korea's most prestigious financial institutions. Its massive glass doors gleamed in the sunlight. Jimin paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and stepped inside, his heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. The bank's interior was the very definition of luxury. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, golden chandeliers overhead, and high ceilings with intricate molding. Well-dressed customers sipped designer coffee while they waited to be served by executives in sharp suits. As soon as Jimin entered, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations died out. Eyes turned toward him. Some clients exchanged whispers and smirks. The unspoken assumption was clear. He didn't belong here. Still, Jimin kept his expression steady and strode toward the reception desk. Behind it, a middle-aged woman with flawless hair and an air of superiority looked him up and down with barely concealed disapproval. The nameplate read Ms. Min. "Can I help you?" she asked dryly, not even trying to sound polite. Jimin replied calmly, his voice steady despite the scrutiny. "I'd like to open a basic bank account." Ms. Min blinked in surprise, but quickly recovered, forcing a tight, fake smile that never reached her eyes. "Our most basic account requires a minimum deposit of 500,000 won. Sir," she said, every word dripping with condescension. "Do you have the required amount with you?" Jimin reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled 20,000 won note. "I have this," he said. For a moment, Ms. Min's facade slipped. Her smile vanished, replaced by barely disguised disdain. She gave a brief, mocking laugh before snapping back into professional mode. "I'm afraid that won't be enough, sir. Perhaps you should try another institution, one more suitable to your situation." Jimin wasn't surprised, but the coldness of her words still stung. Around him, a few customers smiled with contempt, and some employees exchanged amused glances. For a moment, he felt vulnerable. This was just a taste of what many people faced every day. Ms. Min nodded curtly, and a security guard, played by BTS's V in disguise, approached. "Sir, if you don't have the necessary funds, I'll have to ask you to leave," he said firmly, making it clear there was no room for debate. Jimin nodded silently and turned to leave, his mind racing. He had come to test the boundaries of perception and humanity, and while the results were predictable, experiencing them firsthand was sobering. As he turned, his eyes met those of a young employee at a nearby desk. She looked to be in her early 20s, and unlike the others, her expression held neither mockery nor contempt. Instead, Jimin saw curiosity and perhaps a flicker of discomfort, as if she was wrestling with her own thoughts. Jimin memorized her face just as the guard's voice brought him back to reality. Outside, the sun still shone, but his thoughts were stormy. The world he'd helped build and inspire seemed very far from the reality he had just experienced, and his experiment was only beginning. Ms. Min let out a dry, dismissive laugh and leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Sir, this is Seoul, not a charity," she said, her tone sharp. With a brusque gesture, she pressed a button on her desk. Immediately, a security guard appeared, his stance intimidating, played by V in disguise. "Sir," said the guard, his voice firm but not unfriendly, I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you don't have the required funds. It was clear this was just another routine for them. Jimin tightened his grip on the 20,001 note in his hand. He hadn't come just to test the bank's rules. He wanted to test their humanity. But the barriers of exclusivity and privilege seemed harder to break than he'd imagined. With a sigh, he nodded and stepped away from the counter. Before leaving, he glanced one last time at the young employee at a nearby desk. Her name tag read Clara. She looked conflicted, her colleagues oblivious to her inner struggle. When Jimin's eyes met hers, he saw something different. Empathy, maybe even a spark of defiance. Outside, the sunlight was just as bright, but his mind was a storm. He'd set out to learn something about the financial system, but what he was discovering went far beyond any bank. Later, in the staff break room, Ms. Min mocked him to her coworker. "Can you believe that guy? Thought he could just walk in here and open an account with 20, she scoffed. Her coworker snickered. "I'm surprised he didn't try to pay with pocket lint." Clara pressed her lips together, forcing herself to stay silent. Their cruelty bothered her, not just because it was mean, but because it clashed with everything she'd been taught about treating people with dignity. The encounter with Jimin lingered in her mind all morning. Wealthy clients came and went, but Clara's thoughts kept circling back to the man in worn-out clothes. She was outraged by how he'd been treated, but even more tormented by her own inaction. At lunchtime, Clara slipped out for some air, needing to clear her head. She wandered to a nearby park, and there he was, Jimin, sitting on a bench just like the day before. He looked relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, watching the world with a quiet intensity. Clara hesitated, but something pushed her forward. She approached, her steps uncertain but determined. "Excuse me," she murmured softly. Jimin looked up, his expression neutral but curious. "I just wanted to apologize for yesterday," Clara said at last. "It wasn't fair the way you were treated." He studied her face for a long moment, as if reading every thought. "You work at the bank, right?" "Yes," Clara admitted, cheeks turning pink. "I'm just a trainee. I don't have much influence." A small, gentle smile appeared on Jimin's lips. "But you still came to find me. That says something." Clara looked away, embarrassed. "I just wanted you to know that not everyone at the bank thinks like that. I don't know if it matters, but I think everyone deserves a chance, no matter their situation." Jimin tilted his head. "Does it matter?" he said softly. Then he gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Why don't you sit for a moment?" Clara hesitated, then sat down. At first, the silence was awkward, but Jimin soon spoke. "Why do you work there?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I always wanted to work in finance. I thought it would be a way to help people, to make a difference." She trailed off, looking down. "But it's not what I expected." Jimin chuckled. "It usually isn't." Clara glanced at him, curiosity growing. "If you don't mind me asking, why did you come to our bank? There are places that might have treated you better." Jimin leaned back on the bench, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes the best way to see people's true colors is to strip. Everyone deserves a chance. Besides, I don't think you're just anyone. There's something different about you." Jimin laughed softly, but there was a spark of curiosity in his gaze. "You don't know me." "No, I don't," Clara admitted, "but I can feel you're not what you seem." As Clara started the process, a sharp voice cut through the moment. It was Miss Min. "Clara, who's that at your desk?" Her tone was suspicious. Clara froze, her hands hovering over the keyboard. "Just helping a new client," she said calmly. Ms. Min frowned, stepping closer, eyes narrowing at Jimin. "A new client? Didn't we reject him yesterday?" "I'm taking care of it," Clara replied firmly, looking at her boss in the eye. Ms. Min hesitated, clearly distrustful, but eventually shrugged and walked away. Clara finished the process, slid the receipt across the desk, and smiled. "You are officially a bank customer now." Jimin looked at the receipt, then at Clara. "You didn't have to do this." "But I wanted to," Clara replied, her voice stronger than before. "Because it's the right thing to do." Jimin's face was unreadable for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, took out a small folded note, and placed it on the desk. "Thank you, Clara," he said quietly. "We'll see each other again soon." Before Clara could answer, he left. With her heart pounding, she unfolded the note. Your actions today will not be forgotten. A chill ran down her spine. She'd taken a huge risk, but something in Jimin's eyes told her she'd done the right thing. What she didn't know was that her small act of rebellion was just the beginning. The next day, Clara arrived at the bank feeling nervous but determined. No one had questioned her yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed the irregularity. She couldn't stop thinking about Jimin's words, "Your actions today will not be forgotten." That afternoon, as Clara was helping a client, the bank doors opened. She froze. It was him. This time something was different. Though Jimin wore the same old clothes, he moved with a silent confidence. Their eyes met. Clara's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly refocused on her work. Ms. Min, however, couldn't hide her irritation. "Sir, we already explained," she began, but Jimin raised his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I didn't come here to cause problems. I just want to make a deposit," Jimin said quietly. Ms. Min blinked in confusion from behind her desk, and Clara felt a faint sense of satisfaction. Jimin walked up to the counter and took out a neatly folded wad of bills, silently sliding it across to Ms. Min. Still flustered, she began to count. 200,000 won, she muttered dismissively, shooting a look at Clara, remembering she had been the one who opened the account. "Well, it seems your account is already in the system. I'll process your deposit. Thank you." Jimin offered her a polite but unmistakably firm smile, then stepped away and headed straight for Clara's desk. She tensed as he approached. "You didn't expect to see me back so soon, did you?" he teased with an intriguing smile. Clara shook her head, still shocked. She truly hadn't expected him to return. Jimin sat down at her desk, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "What I said yesterday, I meant it. Your kindness didn't go unnoticed." Clara blushed. "I only did what I thought was right." "And that's exactly what matters," Jimin replied. He leaned forward. "You took a risk. You didn't know who I was or what I could do, but you acted on principle. That's rare." Clara hesitated, finally summoning the courage to ask, "Who are you, really?" For a moment, Jimin's eyes sparkled with mischief and amusement. "Let's just say I'm someone who likes to test the system." Before Clara could ask anything else, he stood up. "You've already done more for me than most people ever would." He leaned in just a little closer and whispered, "But if you're willing to take another risk, I'd like to ask for your help again." Clara's curiosity flared. "What kind of help?" Jimin smiled just for her. "Meet me at the park after your shift. There's something I want to show you." The rest of Clara's day blurred by. She couldn't concentrate, her mind consumed by his unexpected request. When her shift ended, she hurried to the park, heart pounding. There he was, waiting for her on the same bench as before, but now there was something different about his smile, a quiet certainty that something big was about to happen. They walked together in silence until Jimin finally spoke. "Clara, have you ever wondered why people are so quick to judge others based only on appearances?" She nodded, remembering the mocking whispers at the bank. "It's something I've never been able to ignore," she admitted, "but I don't know how to change it." Jimin stopped and looked at her. "Sometimes the only way to change a system is to challenge it directly." Clara frowned, trying to grasp his meaning. "You're testing the system." Jimin gave a faint, knowing smile. "In a way, yes. I've spent most of my life building and challenging systems. The problem with systems is they often forget the people they're supposed to serve." His words stayed with Clara. "So what are you really trying to prove?" "I'm not here to prove anything," Jimin said gently. "I'm looking for people who still believe in doing the right thing, even when it isn't easy." They walked on until they reached a sleek black air parked at the curb. Squabba, Jimin opened the passenger door. "I want to show you something." Clara hesitated, her instincts warning her to be careful, but her curiosity won out. She got in the car. As the city lights flickered past the window, Jimin finally explained, "I've been testing banks, businesses, and other institutions, seeing how they treat people when they think those people have nothing to offer." Clara was stunned. "That's ambitious?" "It's necessary," Jimin replied. "Too many places focus on appearances and money, not people. But every now and then, I find someone like you, someone who looks deeper." They arrived at a high-rise and took a private elevator. When the doors opened, Clara gasped. An ultra-modern workspace, floor-to-ceiling windows, high-tech desks everywhere. "Where are we?" she whispered. "One of my workspaces," Jimin said, his voice softer than before. "I'm showing you this because I believe you're different. You didn't know who I was, but you did the right thing anyway. I don't believe in letting talent go to waste." Clara felt herself blush. "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" Jimin smiled. "I want to offer you a job, something more meaningful than your work at the bank. I'm building a team of people with integrity, innovation, and humanity. People like you." The opportunity left Clara breathless. Her old job felt empty. This could be a way out. After a moment, she nodded. "I'm in." Jimin's smile grew wide. He reached out his hand. "Welcome to the team." The next morning, Clara woke up anxious and excited. The bank felt colder and emptier than ever. But now she knew she had an exit. That afternoon, just when she began to wonder if it had all been a dream, the glass doors opened and Jimin walked in again. His clothes were simple, but his presence commanded the room. Conversations hushed as he strode over to Clara's desk. "Good afternoon, Clara," he said warmly. She blinked in surprise. "Good afternoon, Jimin." He took out a wad of bills and placed them on her desk. "I'd like to make a deposit, something more substantial this time." The buzz in the bank grew. Ms. Min eyed him with a frown. Clara entered the amount into the system, her hand shaking. 10. "You're Jimin of BTS, he murmured. Jimin nodded. "Yes, I've spent the last few weeks testing institutions like yours, seeing how you treat people who appear to have nothing." Mr. Park shifted nervously. "Mr. Jimin, I assure you this was an isolated incident. We value every customer." Jimin raised his hand, stopping him. "No excuses. The only reason I'm here now is because of Clara. If it weren't for her, I would have taken my business elsewhere. She showed integrity, compassion, and courage." Then Jimin delivered the bombshell. "I'm buying this bank." Mr. Park's jaw dropped. "Surely, Mr. Jimin, we can come to an agreement." Jimin's smile was polite but icy. "Of course, your position will be reevaluated. I suggest you start preparing for major changes." He left the office and the entire bank stared in stunned silence as he walked straight to Clara. All eyes were on them. Clara, stunned, heard Jimin say loudly, "Your actions didn't just change my perception of this bank. They reminded me why I started this experiment in the first place." She blinked. "Mr. Jimin, call me Jimin." He placed a business card on her desk. "I want you to work with me full-time, starting today." The whole bank held its breath as Clara stared at the card, her heart pounding. I don't know what to say," Clara stammered. "Say yes," Jimin replied gently. Clara looked around. Their co-workers stared in disbelief. She remembered every moment she'd felt out of place at that bank, invisible or even judged for her values. Now, for the first time, doing the right thing was being recognized. She looked at Jimin. "Yes," she whispered. He smiled, extending his hand. "Welcome to the team." As she left the bank, the employees murmured, watching her as if she were someone completely new. But Clara didn't care. Her life had just changed forever. Clara's new world. The next morning, Clara arrived at her new job, a dazzling glass tower in the heart of Seoul. State-of-the-art screens lined the walls, offering panoramic city views. This place wasn't just a bank, it was the future. A receptionist led her to a private elevator. When the doors opened, Jimin was waiting. "Welcome to your new office," he said, smiling. Clara looked around, amazed. "This is incredible." "What matters isn't the place," Jimin replied, "but what we're going to do here." That day, Clara met her new team. They weren't just bankers, they were innovators and dreamers, people determined to change the system. For the first time in her life, Clara felt like she belonged. Most exciting of all, she realized her impact on Jimin's vision was just beginning. Later, Clara entered Jimin's office, nervous but excited. "What exactly will my role be here?" she asked. Jimin leaned back in his chair, eyes analytical but kind. "You're going to help us redesign how financial institutions operate. We want systems that prioritize people over profit, treating everyone with dignity regardless of their status. Clara's heart soared. That sounds ambitious. It is, Jimin said, but I didn't bring you here for an easy job. The following weeks were the most challenging and exhilarating of Clara's life. She dove into projects that would revolutionize banking. She learned about cutting-edge technology, the psychology of financial exclusion, and how empathy could change everything. Jimin was both inspiring and demanding. He pushed her to question, to innovate, to learn from failure. Though the learning curve was steep, Clara soon realized she was thriving. Transforming a community bank, one sunny afternoon, Jimin took Clara to visit a struggling community bank in a disadvantaged district. The contrast was stark: exhausted staff, outdated systems, clients desperate for help. "We're here to help," Jimin assured the weary manager. "Clara will lead this project." "Me?" Clara gasped. "No one understands what needs to change better than you," Jimin said. Over the following weeks, Clara worked tirelessly to implement Jimin's vision. More efficient processes, digital tools for simple transactions, staff empowerment training, and a culture of empathy. When the transformation was complete, the bank was unrecognizable, a beacon of hope. The media and industry insiders took notice. The once insecure apprentice had become a true leader. One night, Jimin reviewed the project's success with her. "I told you it wouldn't be easy," he said. "It wasn't," Clara admitted with a smile, "but it was worth it, and it's just the beginning." That night, Clara walked home reflecting on how far she'd come. The man in rags who had walked into her bank weeks ago had changed her life forever. Now she was determined to pay it forward, facing resistance. As word of their success spread, Clara found herself in the spotlight. The media praised the transformation, but not everyone was pleased. The big banks felt threatened and began to discredit the project, calling it idealistic and unsustainable. In a tense meeting, a senior banking executive scoffed, "You can't rewrite the rules. The financial sector just doesn't work this way." That evening, Clara confided in Jimin. "They don't want to change. They love the system as it is." Jimin just shrugged. "Of course they don't. People resist when their power is threatened." He smiled gently. "That's why we have to show them they're wrong." His words rekindled Clara's determination. She realized that resistance wasn't failure. It was proof they were making an impact. As the project grew, Jimin presented Clara with a new challenge: integrate artificial intelligence and blockchain, create mobile apps for rural areas, and design digital financial education programs. Clara worked with developers and tech experts, sometimes overwhelmed by the scale. "How do you feel about this?" Jimin asked late one night. "It's exciting, but overwhelming," Clara admitted. "There's so much to learn and the risks are huge." Jimin smiled. "That means it's worth it. Projects that seem impossible are the ones that truly matter." The day of the big financial conference arrived. Backstage, Clara was nervous. Jimin encouraged her, "Your story is exactly what these people need to hear." Stepping onto the podium, Clara looked out at a room full of influential bankers and business people. She began, "Banking isn't just about numbers. It's about people. Every financial decision we make can either lift someone up or leave them behind." She shared her story, how she'd seen indifference in her old bank, how Jimin showed her that change was possible, and how they'd transformed a small bank into a model for the future. She closed with a question: what kind of system do we want? One that only serves the wealthy, or one that creates opportunity for everyone? The audience erupted in applause. Later, Jimin found her backstage. "You did it," he said, pride in his eyes. Clara smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have," Jimin replied gently. "You just needed someone to see your potential." Clara knew she still had a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Leadership and burnout. As the movement gained any momentum, Clara faced more demands than ever. She led multiple initiatives, coordinated teams, and pitched ideas to investors. The pressure mounted. Some team members resisted change. Others doubted her experience. In one meeting, a senior manager grumbled, "Why change something that works?" Clara answered, "Just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved." We're not replacing the old, we're building something better for the people who need us. Slowly, the skeptics began to listen, but Clara was exhausted. Her roommate, Kelly, worried. You're doing amazing things, but when do you rest? Clara didn't know how to answer. The breaking point came when Jimin invited her for tea. You've done a phenomenal job, he told her gently, but I see the price you're paying. There's just so much to do. I don't want to let anyone down, Clara said. Jimin smiled warmly. You're not letting anyone down by taking care of yourself. Leadership is about sustaining your energy for the long term. If you burn out, you can't help anyone. Those words stayed with her. From then on, Clara learned to delegate and to take moments for herself, and realized that rest made her a better leader. Months later, Jimin launched his most ambitious project yet, a model bank based on inclusion and transparency. The mission, to prove that ethical banking could be both possible and profitable. The name People First Bank, and the project director, Clara. Excited and terrified, Clara confided her doubts to Jimin. What if we fail? Failure is always a possibility, Jimin replied, but so is success. The real question isn't if we'll face obstacles, it's how we overcome them. Taking courage from his words, Clara poured herself into the project. Every detail, from accessibility and zero abusive fees to truly human service, was designed to reflect her values. The day of the People First Bank's inauguration arrived, and Clara was speechless. A line of customers stretched down the entire street. People from every background entered with excitement and hope. The staff smiled and helped with an enthusiasm she'd never seen in banking. Together, they had created something different, something historic. Jimin approached her with a proud smile. What do you think? Clara looked around, her eyes shining. This is everything we dreamed of. Jimin nodded, and this is just the beginning. The impact was immediate. The media called it a banking revolution. Other banks began to imitate their model. What had once seemed like a naive experiment was now an undeniable reality. Clara had come full circle, from a powerless apprentice in an unfair system to the leader of a movement changing the world from within. But her journey wasn't over. She was just getting started. The news of People First Bank shook the entire industry, but it also brought enemies. Big banks launched media attacks, calling Jimin's vision naive and unsustainable. Financial experts dismissed it as a passing trend. Clara felt frustrated. That night, Jimin reassured her with calm wisdom. If they're fighting us, it means we're doing something right. He was right. Motivated, Clara launched a new project. Mobile banks, solar-powered trucks bringing financial services to rural and underserved areas. The result was extraordinary. In a small village, an old man approached her in tears. No one has ever brought a bank here before, he said. Clara knew then her work truly mattered. Together, Clara and Jimin were building a new global financial system. When Clara's name was announced at a global summit, she stepped into the spotlight. The bright lights blinded her for a moment, but she took a deep breath and spoke. From my days as an apprentice, helping a man in ragged clothes to leading a financial revolution, I learned that we have the tools to make finance a force for good. But it starts with a choice: to put people before profit, to build systems that include, not exclude. The room fell silent, then erupted in a standing ovation. Leaders from around the world came to offer support. Inspired by Jimin, People First Bank grew across Korea and then beyond. Jimin encouraged Clara to dream even bigger. The world needs brave leaders who challenge the status quo. You've already proven you can do it. Now take it further. Clara took his words to heart. She devised a plan to bring accessible banking to the world's underserved. In Kenya, where millions relied on informal financial systems, Clara launched a pilot with mobile banking units and digital support centers. She met Aisha, a farmer who, after opening her first bank account, beamed, "Now I can dream big. I can plan a future for my children." That phrase reaffirmed Clara's mission. Soon the model was replicated around the globe. But the path wasn't easy. Some governments resisted, fearing for their control. In a tense meeting in Southeast Asia, Clara explained, "We're not here to replace your system, but to improve it, to create opportunity where none exists." Her sincerity won them over. The project moved forward. Jimin, watching her growth from afar, called to congratulate her. You're not just building banks, Clara. You're building bridges. As People First Bank spread internationally, Clara became a leading voice for financial inclusion. Activists, economists, and politicians echoed her message. Money isn't just numbers. Every decision can lift someone up or leave them behind. It's up to us to build systems that serve everyone. On the phone, Clara said, "You saw something in me that I didn't see." Jimin replied, "I didn't make you who you are. I just gave you the opportunity to prove it. The rest was all you." Knowing the future depended on new leaders, Clara began training others. She told young executives, never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness. It may seem small, but it can change everything. In less than a year, People First Bank had a presence in more than 20 countries. One evening on a skyscraper terrace in India, Clara gazed out at the illuminated city as Jimin joined her. "You've achieved something incredible," he said. Clara smiled. "So have you." Jimin shook his head. "This was always about you. You took the risks. You made the sacrifices. You turned a vision into reality." Clara let his words sink in. She knew there was still so much more to do, but together they were building something that would outlast them both. A fairer financial system, a model built on humanity and hope. That was their legacy, and they were just getting started. Reflecting on it all, Clara realized, I was just an apprentice, not knowing my place in the world. I never imagined a small act of kindness could change my life and the lives of so many. With new strength, she addressed a crowd. What we've built isn't just a bank, it's a movement. It's proof that finance can be a force for good, that we can create systems that empower, not exclude. This movement isn't about one person or one organization. It's about all of us, the choices we make, the values we stand for, the future we build together. The audience stood and applauded, a standing ovation that lasted minutes. Jimin joined in, pride shining in his eyes. That evening, backstage, Clara and Jimin shared a quiet moment. "You've created something extraordinary," Jimin said. Clara smiled. "I wouldn't have made it without you." Jimin shook his head. "I just gave you a chance. You turned it into something bigger than I ever imagined. That is your legacy." "It's not mine alone," Clara replied softly. "It belongs to everyone who believed in this vision." Jimin nodded. "And it will live long after we're gone." Clara eventually stepped back from daily operations, focusing on mentoring the next generation. She saw herself in a young protege, Amara, idealistic, determined, full of promise. In their last session, Clara gave the advice Jimin had once given her. Don't be afraid to challenge the system. The toughest battles are the most important. It's not about being perfect, it's about moving forward. Amara's eyes sparkled. "I won't let you down." Clara smiled. "No, you'll do it. I believe in you." One quiet night, Clara returned to the park where it all began. She sat on the same bench where she'd met Jimin, back then disguised in humble clothes. The memory felt both distant and alive. She thought of all that had changed since that day. How a single choice led her down a path she'd never imagined. Jimin arrived with 2 cups of coffee. "I knew I'd find you here," he said, handing her one. They sat together in silence, watching the world. "Do you think we've done enough?" Clara asked at last. Jimin took a thoughtful sip. "Enough, no, but we did something. And that something inspired others to do more. That's how change works." Clara nodded, feeling peace. The fight would never end, but she knew they'd made a difference. As they walked away from the bench, the sun was setting, bathing the city in golden light. Their legacy wasn't in buildings or policies. It was in the lives changed, the hope sparked, the opportunities created. Clara knew in that moment the future was bright, not because the work was finished, but because it was just beginning.